Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the webinar series titled Who Regulates Our Foods? I first want to thank you all for spending your lunch hour with us. And I also especially want to thank our presenters in advance for their time and their willingness to collaborate and contribute to this educational series. My name is Lynette Johnston, and I am an assistant professor and a food safety extension specialist with the Department of Food, Bioprocessing, and Nutrition Sciences. On behalf of every one of us in food safety extension, as well as our regulatory agencies, this question of who regulates my food business, who regulates my product that I make, is one that we consistently receive. So our goal for this webinar is to provide clarity regarding our state's regulatory agencies and allow for questions among the audience, be it, from fellow food safety extension specialists, county extension agents, as well as especially our industry stakeholders, okay? We welcome your questions. And we will indeed have time for those questions at the end. Please know that we will be recording these presentations, and we will follow up with that discussion or that Q&A session. The Q&A session will not be recorded. Again, I want to thank our presenters, and just as a reminder of the schedule, we will be connecting with this webinar throughout the month of August and September 1st, every Wednesday. As you can see here, the purpose of today's webinar is to provide an introduction of the specific divisions and programs that we're going to be talking about. And then follow up on a weekly basis, the next few Wednesdays, we're going to dive deeper into, some of these programs here. One being the North Carolina Department of Ag and Consumer Services Food Program. That's on August 11th. On August 18th, we'll go into the Produce Safety Program, followed by the Meat and Poultry Inspection Division. And then we'll wrap this up with Shane Smith at the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services within the Food Protection and Facilities branch. So you will certainly have an opportunity to ask those specific questions during that deeper dive in the subsequent presentations. So with that, again, thanks to our speakers. We're going to kick this off with Mr. Daniel Gaines from the NCDA and Consumer Services Food Program, followed by Chris Harris representing the Produce Safety Program. Lisa Benton will represent the Meat and Poultry Inspection Division, and Shane Smith will end the introduction today within the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services Division. So with that, Daniel, I will kick this off and send it to you. Oh, I think you're muted, Daniel.
That would help, wouldn't it? Thank you, Lynette. And thank all of you for joining this presentation seminar today. We really appreciate everybody's getting on here and seeing who regulates who, as Lynette says. As she said, I'm Daniel Gaines with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, Food and Drug Protection Division. And I'm going to talk a little bit about a brief overview of the food program. Next slide, please. So our Food and Drug Protection Division consists of 5 programs and an on-site laboratory. The food program, which I'm the administrator over, we have a dairy program, which is the grade A, feed program, produce program, a drug program, and then we have an ISO 17025 accredited laboratory. Next slide, please. Our goal as a food regulatory agency is to enforce food safety and ensure compliance with the laws and regulations that are afforded us. We want to also promote and protect public health, and we want to educate while we regulate our industry partners, our partner regulatory agencies, and other stakeholders. Next slide, please. So our food program structure, we basically regulate packaged goods, and we also regulate retail and wholesale manufacturing, processing, packing, holding, distribution, and sale. Our field staff is located across the state, and they're set up regionally from Eastern North Carolina, Central, Piedmont, and Western. Our Office of Compliance staff, they respond to inquiries for regulatory information, and they also review inspection reports among some of their other duties. And then we have the accredited laboratory that tests for microbiological, chemical, pesticide, and foreign materials in foods. Next slide, please. Our food program jurisdiction. So our biggest component of our food firms are our commercial manufacturers, processors, packers, and repackers. And then we regulate distribution centers and warehouses. We also we have retail food stores under our jurisdiction, grocery stores, which consist of the bakery area, the produce area, and the retail packaged good area, specialty stores such as ice cream shops, then retail bakeries, of course, fish markets, shell egg producers, farm-stayed dairies, and those are the dairies that use their milk to produce products. And then we have a home processor program. Next slide, please. And these are the high-risk food products that fall under our jurisdiction. This slide does not encompass them all, but we have ready-to-eat refrigerated foods, low-acid canned foods, that's like green beans, pickles, sauces, and other acidified foods, cheese, butter, ice cream, and other frozen desserts, seafood and shellfish products, bottled water and beverages, fruit and vegetable juices, and dietary supplements, just to name some. Next slide, please. We also have low-risk food products that fall in our jurisdiction as well. Your baked goods, which consist of breads, muffins, cakes, cookies, and others. Traditional jams and jellies, candies and chocolates, repackaged nuts, honey, spices, and dry mixes, popcorn, roasted peanuts, peanut butter, granola, cereal bars, maple syrup, tea, coffee, lemonade, ice, and alcoholic beverages, just to name a few. Next slide, please. This is our regulatory authority, which gives us the jurisdiction to conduct our inspections. The North Carolina Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is the overall arching law that we refer to. And then there's the North Carolina Administrative Code, which describes the rules and standards adopted by reference. And then the Code of Federal Regulations are regulations that provide specific guidance on rules and regulations that we need to follow. Next slide, please. So that was just a general overview of what we do, who we are, what we regulate, and our laws. So for more information, you can contact our office at 919-733-7366, and that's to speak to a compliance officer. And our next presentation on August 11th will go more in depth on some of the things we do here at the food program. Next slide, please. And thank you for listening and attending.
Good afternoon. I believe I've unmuted myself. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes, Chris, thank you.
Thank you, Lynette. My name's Chris Harris, and I'm the Produce Program Manager here at the North Carolina Department of Agriculture. As Daniel mentioned, we are also a program underneath the Food and Drug Protection Division. Basically, the Produce Safety Program is one of the newer programs here at the Department of Agriculture under the Food and Drug Protection Division. Next slide, please. So under the different divisions within the Department of Agriculture, we do fall under the food program. However, with these new regulations, we are focused on produce safety. Some of those entities have not been, or some of those operations have not been basically had inspection from, say, the Department of Agriculture in previous years. So one of our main goals is to bring the growers here, bring the growers here in North Carolina, up to speed through outreach and education, as well as preparing for meeting these new regulations that we're going to talk about here in a few minutes. Next slide, please. Well, those new regulations are what we call the produce safety rule. And the produce safety rule is one of the newer regulations that falls underneath the Food Safety and Modernization Act. So the food safety rule was established with science-based minimum standards, which really focuses on the growing, the harvesting, the packing, and the holding of produce for human consumption. And the approach we take is really from farm to fork, with a focus on preventing contamination or potential adulteration of any of the fruits and vegetables that may be of a concern, for a foodborne illness. All right, next slide. So the produce safety rule is made up of these different topics here that are all what we call these covered activities, as well as these are the subparts of the produce safety rule. And as we venture into these next presentations, we'll go into much more depth on each of these subparts. But what we call covered activities, this relates to all of these components here during the growing, harvesting, packing, or holding fresh produce. All right, the next slide. So the produce safety rule that we have adopted really focuses on outreach and education. So for the last few years, we have tried to reach out to all the growers here in North Carolina that we can, to provide educational support, to provide outreach, to discuss the produce safety rule. We collaborate with NC State University, NC State Extension, our research stations, as well as a variety of other collaborators that we have here in North Carolina. Ultimately, we're trying to identify farms that will be covered farms, meaning they might be subject to an inspection from our department. But the main focus has been to educate and bring everyone up to speed on these FSMA regulations and the produce safety rule, and help growers determine if they are subject to the rule or not. We can jump to the next slide. So our team consists currently of 3 inspectors, a compliance officer, an outreach coordinator, and a liaison with our research stations. Our motto and our goal has always been to educate before and while we regulate. And we'll talk a lot about that, especially during our next presentation, but those are the words that we stand by. And even, Daniel's team with the food program, we're all working together to educate before and while we regulate. We're really here to help. We are a resource for the growers here in North Carolina. We want to ensure that the produce farms here are in compliance with the produce safety rule, and we're doing that. We're doing everything we can to try to reach these growers, to provide outreach and education on all aspects of growing, harvesting, packing, and holding. We can jump to the next slide. So we talk about covered farms. It gets pretty complicated in this regulation, in this rule, to determine if a farm is covered under the produce safety rule. We'll talk about commonly consumed raw commodities of produce. We'll talk about the size of the operation based on sales, 3-year average of those sales. If the produce is being sold directly to the consumer, or a restaurant, or a food establishment, or I should say a retail establishment, or if it's being sold directly to a distributor or a wholesaler. It starts really getting complicated, and then there are some exemptions for produce that is intended to be commercially processed. So as we talk about growing, harvesting, packing, and holding, and those covered activities, then we have to determine, is the farm covered under the produce safety rule and potentially eligible for an inspection. So let's jump to the next slide. So these particular commodities here are commodities that would be traditionally consume raw that are listed in the produce safety rule. So we're only focused on these at this time. There are some nuances in here, potentially a mushroom is just listed as a mushroom, but it, could include, say, a truffle. So a truffle is a mushroom. So just having that mushroom status in there could be a little confusing. So this list right here is really what we're focused on, and we want to stress that even though a farm may grow one of these commodities, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are subject to the produce safety rule or an inspection. Let's jump to the next slide. So this is just a brief overview of what we're doing here at the Produce Safety Program. Our main goal has always been outreach and education, and will continue to be outreach and education, identifying those farms that are subject to the produce safety rule, working with our growers, and as we move towards inspections, continuing inspections, we will support our growers and support the produce industry. And if you have any further details, or further questions, we are definitely going to go into more in-depth discussion on August 18th with what we do at the Produce Safety Program. And we can jump to the next slide. This is my contact information, as well as our outreach coordinator, Sarah Coate, and we will be the ones presenting to you during the next presentation on the 18th, and look forward to your questions and hearing from some of the growers that might be on the call, or the agents that might be on the call, and just working with everyone to try to answer all the questions related to our produce safety initiative. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Lisa Benton with the North Carolina Department of Agriculture's Meat and Poultry Inspection Division. Been with the agency here for 20 years. So I think I may be able to provide some guidance to you guys. Next slide, please, Lynette. So our agency's mission is to protect the health and welfare of the consumers by enforcing federal and state laws, rules, regulations, and policies designed to ensure that all meat and poultry products distributed to the consumer are wholesome, unadulterated, and properly labeled. So we kind of go off of two entities, laws being the Federal Meat Inspection Act and the Poultry Products Inspection Act for the federal laws, and then our own North Carolina laws with the North Carolina compulsory meat laws and the poultry products inspection laws. Next slide. Just to give you a little bit of history about our program, in 1962, there was a mandatory inspection program for plants that were just doing business across state lines. So if they were selling within their county, their county lines. So if they were just selling within their county, they didn't need any inspection from us. But once they crossed that line, then there was a requirement for inspection. There were some exemptions for the country ham cures and for establishments solely within those county boundaries. Next slide. So in 1968, there was a cooperative agreement signed with the USDA under the Talmadge-Aiken Act. And this agreement between the federal and state agencies allowed for state inspectors to be licensed by the federal government to inspect in facilities and allow these products to be sold across state lines. So we get more of an interstate transactions or movement of product. And in the beginning, there was only 9 state plants that were granted this inspection. And we're currently up to 114 establishments with better transportation with refrigerated trucks and better road systems and rail systems to move the product across the state. Next slide. And in 1968, there was another cooperative agreement signed, the Wholesome Meat Act. And this was the agreement between state and federal companies, agents, or agencies that brought approximately 200 slaughter and processing plants under inspection in June of 1969. And this is so an inspection program across the whole state. And it took 120 full-time inspectors and 50 contract veterinarians to be able to provide inspection to those 200 establishments. Next slide. So just a little bit about our jurisdiction. What we are responsible for from the regulatory side is red meat slaughter and or further processing establishment, and poultry further processing establishment. And red meat being cattle, swine, sheep, goats, and equine. And the poultry, of course, is the chickens, turkeys, ducks, geese, and ratites, guineas, and squabs. So any of the actual poultry slaughter part that establishments do that's going to bear a mark of inspection, those are covered by our federal counterparts at the USDA. But we do cover the further processing of products. And any firms that are wholesaling meat or poultry products are required by law to be inspected by either the NCDA or the USDA Food Safety Inspection Service, depending on where they're looking to sell those products at. Some of our other jurisdiction is our custom exempt facilities. These are facilities where the farmer can bring an animal to the facility and have it slaughtered, processed, and the establishment will stamp that product not for sale, and then that product can go back to that individual who brought it for the consumption of their family and get non-paying guests. Another thing we also register are meat and poultry handlers, and this is a program that's fairly new. And with this program, this allows a farmer to raise animals of their own, take them to an inspected facility, and have them slaughtered and processed and labeled as inspected products, so they bear a mark of inspection. And then they can take these items and store them at their home under this registration, and then they can sell the items from there, take them to farmers markets, restaurants or whatnot, and sell their actual meat. So they're marketing themselves, but not actually processing it. We also have poultry exempt operators, and these are operated under a couple of exemptions. There's a 1,000 bird exemption and a 20,000 bird exemptions that allow farmers to raise birds on their farm and to slaughter and process them on farm and take them other places to sell them, such as farmers markets. They can sell them to restaurants, grocery stores, other institutions for that. But those are actually all on farm slaughter and raising of the animals. Next slide. Our division is one of 27 states that actually have a state meat inspection program. If a state doesn't have a meat inspection program, then the USDA would cover the inspections for those states. We actually have both state and federal inspection. We have 164 establishments total that we're responsible for. 50 of those are state establishments that can only sell product within the state, and 114 TA establishments. So those establishments are the ones that can apply that federal mark of inspection, ship that product across state lines, or export it to sell. We have just over 1,500 registered meat handlers in the state, and we have 268 poultry exempt operators. And for our division, it takes 118 employees to manage all these inspections. That includes our meat and poultry inspectors, which we have 84 of those across the state. We have 9 area supervisors. We have 7 veterinarians. We have 5 compliance officers. We have 3 full-time trainers and some field trainers as well. And then we have our support staff in our office as well. Next slide. So last year, our agency, we were quite busy. We had almost 200 million pounds of red meat that we inspected, just over 57 million pounds of poultry that we inspected. We had a little over 3.5 million pounds of catfish. That does fall under our jurisdiction as well. We actually inspected just over 14,000 cattle and 441 calves. We inspected 319,000 swine and just over 27,000 sheep. And that includes lambs as well. We had just over 15,000 goats. Some of the other items, animals that we inspect are ostriches, bison, and water buffalo. Last year we didn't have any ostriches, but we did 57 bison and 7 water buffalo. Bison and water buffalo fall under our voluntary inspection. And then there was just under 1,500 animals that were condemned, so they didn't pass for human consumption. Next slide. So we talked a little bit about the catfish. That's an item that is something we just started regulating back in 2017. That's one of the items that's regulated by the USDA. And we have 3 establishments in the state that we inspect under our Talmadge Aiken program that further process and slaughter these fluoroforms and catfish and whatnot that we're responsible for. Next slide. So I want to talk a little bit about our compliance staff. These guys, they are the ones that investigate violations from our North Carolina compulsory meat and poultry products inspection law. They're looking for illegal slaughter operations and processing activities. They look for the preparation, transport, and or sale of misbranded or adulterated products. And they also go out and investigate any consumer complaints that we receive, as far as if somebody finds, let's say, I don't know, plastic in their product that they purchased that has a mark of inspection. They do other special investigations. They also help with the recalls if there happens to be a recall in the state. And they're responsible for evaluating and registering our meat and poultry handlers, our poultry exempt operators, our cold storage warehouses, and 4D operators. So they go out and do random reviews and look to see that products being sold in different stores or whatnot has the proper inspection and is not adulterated. Next slide. So our office is actually located in the main ag building downtown, but we do have inspectors scattered throughout the state. If you have any questions, you can feel free to give us a call. If you look on our website for additional information as well. Next slide. And if you have more specific questions, we have another presentation on August the 25th that I'm going to go into more in depth on our regulatory requirements and what we're looking for before we can allow someone to have a grant of inspection. So please tune in then, and hopefully I can be able to provide you with more information. And that's it. Thank you, Lynette.
I believe I'm up last, but maybe not least. Hi, everybody. I'm Shane Smith. I'm the branch head for the Food Protection and Facilities branch for DHHS Environmental Health section. I've been the branch head for about 3.5 years now. Before that, I was a regional specialist with the state for about 4 years. And before that, I worked in a county regulatory office at Wayne County for about 14 years. So I've got almost a total of 20 years of experience. Going a little bit overview of what our program does and how we regulate the facilities here in the state of North Carolina, and we'll be available to answer any questions afterwards, and we'll provide a more in-depth overview once we get to our portion in September. Next slide, Lynette. So this is just our regional map, just to kind of give you an idea of how our regional staff works within the state. We regulate over 36,000 establishments within the state of North Carolina that meet our definition under our rules and regulations by the general statutes. We have a total of 10 regional specialists that are situated throughout the state that help with local health departments with authorization process. Here in North Carolina, we are a decentralized state. So although they are state rules that have to be followed in order to meet the requirements under our statutes and rule and law, they are actually carried out by our local environmental health specialists. And I saw through the participants that we have several on here today, and I want to thank them as always for the hard work and dedication they have. Our regional specialists are set up throughout the state to handle consultation, authorizations, and other visits for standardizations through FDA within our state. And you can see the list here and the numbers that correspond to the individual regional specialist that helps with each individual county. Also, if you have a question and you do have a business in that county, we are able to provide information to that local county to try to help you with those questions. Next slide, Lynette. So how are we defined and how is food defined? So our regulations for the establishment we are defined by what we consider a potentially hazardous food, or what we more define as time control for safety food. So potentially hazardous food means it's time control for safety, means a food that requires time temperature control for safety to limit pathogenic microorganism growth or toxin formation. Also, potentially hazardous food includes any animal food that is raw or heat treated, a plant food that is heat treated or consists of raw seed sprouts, cut melons, cut leafy greens, cut tomatoes, or mixtures of cut tomatoes that are not modified in a way so they are unable to support pathogenic microorganism growth or toxin formation, or a garlic and oil mixture that are not modified in a way so that they are unable to support pathogenic microorganism growth or toxin formation. Next slide, please. So when we consider that, what is actually a food establishment? A food establishment is defined in our rules by one that stores, prepares, packages, serves, vends food directly to the consumer, or otherwise provide food for human consumption, such as a restaurant, satellite, or catered food location. Catering operation if the operation provides food directly to a consumer. We also have many other things in our rules that will go more in depth when we get to our portion in September, which are like mobile food units, push carts, limited food stands, temporary food stands, and other operations that may fall under our rule and regulation. Like I said, we will go in more in depth in September. Next slide, Lynette. So what is actually regulated? Our rules and laws, and we get the authority for that under our general statutes. So our main general statute that deal with the regulation of food and lodging establishments is NC General Statute 130A 248. So for this is for the protection of public health, the commission shall adopt rules governing the sanitation of establishments to prepare or serve drink or food for pay, and establishments that prepare and sell meat, food products, or poultry products. However, any establishment that prepares or serves food or drink to the public, regardless of pay, shall be subject to the provisions of this article if the establishment that prepares or serves food or drink holds an ABC permit, such as defined in General Statute 18B 101, or meets any definitions in General Statute 18B 1000, and does not meet the definition of a brewery as provided in GS 130A 247, or private bar or private club as in 130A 247 1B or 130A 247 2. So this kind of goes just how we look at how it's defined and which is regulated. And then we have our rules that we follow, which is right now the 2009 version of the food code. And we'll talk about that here in a little bit. Next slide, Lynette. Continuing on, so for the protection of public health, the commission shall adopt these rules that also govern sanitations of hotels, motels, tourist home, and other establishments that provide lodging for pay. So this is where we get our regulatory authority to provide inspections for hotels, bed and breakfast inns, bed and breakfast homes, and other rules that, defined under 138 247. And in carrying out this function, the commission shall adopt the requirements that are least restrictive as to protect public health and not unreasonably interfere with the operation of bed and breakfast homes and bed and breakfast inns. Next slide, please. So a couple of things just to be a reminder that includes, and these are statutes that go a little bit before, but it coincide with how we get our definition of where our rules come from. So 138 247 includes the definitions of the establishments that serve food or drink. And these include such things as private bar, private club, what is a bed and breakfast home, what is a bed and breakfast inn. And then also there are exemptions within our statutes that allow you to operate in a manner to that you do not have to meet the regulations under 138 248. And these are things such as curb markets, private clubs, private bars, cooking schools, and then also what the definition of a regular boarder is. And these are, like I said, exemptions within the rules. They serve food or drink, but they meet the specific exemption within the statutes. And that means they do not have to fall under our rule or law within these statutes. Next slide, please. So our rules that govern for the food protection and eating establishments, we have our main rules, which are 15A NCAC 18A 2600. And that basically allows for the adoption of the FDA food code, which right now in the state at this current moment, we have the 2009 version, but I am happy to update. We had our Commission of Public Health meeting just maybe an hour and a half ago, and we are on to our last hurdle to adopt the 2017 food code. We have passed both meetings with the Public Health Commission. We had a public comment period, and our version of the 2017 food code moves to the Rules Review Commission on September 16th. And after that, they are in line, if all goes well, to be adopted as our set of rules for October 1st. And we are looking forward to that because that will be the most up-to-date and current set of scientific rules within the food code. Next slide, please. So these are some topics we're going to get into a little bit more once we get into September. So what kind of businesses are covered under our rules, besides the ones I spoke specifically of earlier? And then what are the fees and permits that are associated with receiving a permit and allowing to operate a food business in the state of North Carolina? How do we make an application for getting a permit? Where do we go to do that? And then where to find the rules that govern? Also, we'll discuss how you work with your inspectors that do your inspections, how many times a year that happens, depending on what type of business. And we'll be glad to answer any kind of questions for other businesses that maybe not fit our rules, but we do meet regularly with our co-parts within the industry for regulatory, like you spoke with earlier here. We have to go and do jurisdiction meetings because there's lots of products that kind of blur the lines of where we fall sometimes. And we meet quarterly with Department of Agriculture, all of our patriots here to make sure we're looking at the new products that come along and make sure we're defining that as best we can. Next slide, please. So that was a very brief introduction, but we will go in more depth in September. My information is here if you have a specific question in regards to a local regulation or a question onto our rules or laws. But also we have our regional specialists available as well. And those information is on our website, and it's that regional map I proposed earlier. And that is all. Thank you, Lynette.